Greetings, everyone. Welcome to Maisha Kazini, where we talk to various thinkers and activists about struggles that they are going through or that they are contributing to. So today, I'm so honored to welcome Jesse Hagopian. He teaches ethnic studies at Garfield High School in Washington State in the US. And the school made history when it boycotted an assessment in 2013. And he's going to tell us more about that experience. Apart from being a teacher, he's also an editor for the social justice magazine called Rethinking Schools, which I encourage us to visit online. He's also the co-editor of books such as Black Lives Matter at School and Teaching for Black Lives. And he's the editor of the book More Than a Score, The New Uprising Against High Stakes Testing. Jesse also received the 2019 Racial Justice Teacher of the Year Award from the NAACP Youth Coalition, and also the Social Justice Teacher of the Year Award from the Seattle Public Schools Department of Racial Equity. Jesse has many achievements which can be found at his website, IamAnEducator.com, which I am going to post a link to below this video. So welcome, Jesse.
Wow, thank you so much for having me on your show. It's an honor. It's so amazing to hear that people in Kenya and people of Africa know of my work. It just blows my mind, and I'm so glad we could be in conversation today.
And we are also so encouraged that you've joined us, but also by your work, because I always tell people, if you really want to know the reality of some of the policies that we get from abroad, watch the African Americans. They know, and they've already started talking about it. And that's what I found when I looked at your work. It was so amazing and so encouraging, although many Kenyans think I'm crazy. So I wanted them to hear from you directly.
All right.
Yeah. So maybe we could start, because we are two teachers. How did you come into teaching? And I know you love teaching. So how did you start?
Absolutely, I love teaching. I mean, what better profession is there than getting to work with young people who you can help unlock their minds and their future and see the incredible changes that they want to make.
Mm-hmm.
And I got started because, you know, I had such a miserable experience in school myself. Had almost no Black teachers, only a couple Black teachers in my entire time in school, and rarely learned anything about Black history, about Africa. Nothing was taught to me that made me see myself in education. And when I went to college, it was primarily because I wanted to play baseball, and it took me a long time. And finally, I found courses that spoke to me and showed me the power of education. So when I graduated, I thought, you know, I want to help kids, especially Black youth and youth of color, see themselves in the curriculum much earlier than I had. So I began teaching in Washington, D.C., and I taught at a school only a few minutes from the White House. And so I would pass the White House on my way to school, and then I'd cross a river, the Anacostia River, and it was like a whole nother world, right? This is one of the most impoverished neighborhoods in the United States. It is just a shame that you can have that much wealth and power concentrated next to people who are just struggling to survive. And that school, I started teaching at an elementary school. I taught 5th and 6th grade to begin with. And, you know, I mean, we had a hole in the ceiling of my classroom. And the first research project I ever gave the students was to find someone from history that you admired, that had made the world a better place. And they did their research, they wrote, they studied, they created these posters they were going to present, they turned them in. And then we came to school the next day, and there was water all over the floor, and the projects had been destroyed because it rained into my classroom.
Oh no.
And so they were never able to present their first project. And that was a profound moment for me, because I realized here in the shadow of the White
Mm,
House and the halls of government, the world's richest country, and they can't just provide for the basic needs of Black children. And that experience made me want to not only do the best I can for my students inside the classroom, but also made me
mm,
realize I had to be a teacher activist and help
mm,
change the conditions of learning and to wrestle the wealth away from those who are hoarding it and keeping
mhm.
it from our kids. So that was
Oh
my start.
wow.
Yeah.
People are gonna be surprised by that here because we think of America as so wealthy. I think it's only now that we are beginning to understand that it's not like that for everyone. But just to explain to Kenyans, how is school funding done in the US?
It's really egregious the way school funding works. It's based on, well, because they have high property values there. But in a neighborhood like Southeast
Mhm.
DC, where I began teaching, you mostly have very low income people. We're talking about a neighborhood that has no grocery stores. So it's what you call a food desert there. Um, they have, pretty much the only social service, if you can call it that, in that neighborhood is the police, who, you know, just brutalize Black communities. They came into our
Mm,
school on a regular basis, jacking up like fourth graders against the wall and yelling at them. And so, a new study just came out in the US that shows that schools that serve students of color, Black students and Indigenous students and Asian and all the rest, those schools receive $23 billion less a year than schools that serve white students in the US. So it's really a whole separate school system that's unequal.
mm. In fact, they're also starting to increase the security. There are now proposals to do the same thing here. It's
Mm.
crazy. And Betsy DeVos's brother, Eric Prince, is also based here in Kenya.
Is that right?
So,
I didn't know that.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
Trump,
So
watch out for him.
I know. And so they just wrote into the law security anti-terror training for children. It was some crazy thing.
Oh,
Weird.
oh, be
Yeah,
careful.
so Eddie, when the US coughs, Kenya gets a cold. Yeah.
Yes, I'm sorry to say that that's true.
Yeah. So there's a lot of securitization of the schools, especially for Black and brown children, but not in the schools attended by majority white kids.
Yes, yes. So the schools with Black and brown children are inundated with police officers, and
Mm,
those police officers have been brutalizing our youth year after year. So there's so many examples I could tell you of, but
mm,
some recent ones to give your listeners an idea. There was a 6-year-old girl at an elementary school in Florida last year who was having a temper tantrum, and the police officer handcuffs her, drags her from her classroom. She's sobbing and pleading, "Give me a second chance, please." And he takes her to the back of the police car, throws her back there, drives her to a youth jail where he fingerprints her and takes her mugshot. And her grandmother came to pick her up and explained that she was suffering from sleep apnea and wasn't getting proper sleep, and
mm,
that's why she was having a hard time in school. But instead of having a school psychologist or
mm,
counselors help talk to her and find out her problems and nurture and support her, in Black and brown schools, they don't fund counselors and school psychologists, but they always have money for a police officer. And so it's really sad. I mean, in New Mexico last year, there's a horrific video of a police officer taking a Black girl and throw an 11-year-old Black girl. He takes her and throws her into a brick wall and wrestles her down to the ground because he thought she took an extra carton of milk from the cafeteria. And she didn't even take the extra carton of milk, as if that was a crime.
As if that's, yeah.
Right. And so this is the regular treatment of our students. In America, 14 million children go to a school that has a police officer, but is missing one of the following: a school psychologist, a counselor, or a nurse, or a social worker. And so the priorities of the American school system are all upside down. It's part of what we have here called the school to prison pipeline. And, you know, the US has some 2 million people behind bars, right? In the quote unquote land of the free.
You know, Ava DuVernay's movies do well here because they resonate with a lot of poor Kenyans who face the same kind of police violence.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Oh,
their work is essential. So yes, it starts as early as preschool and elementary, how they build the school to prison pipeline. It's really sad. Yeah.
All right. So, you know, in all that, they seem to have a lot of time to test the children. So maybe you could explain to us what tests these are, who's taking them, how many do the children take? You know, just give us an overview of what these tests are about.
Absolutely. And I would also suggest to you all that the tests are really part of the school to prison pipeline. And I want to talk about how that works as well.
Okay.
But in the United States, the average student takes 112 standardized tests in their K-12 career. It's not like there's one big test at the end of elementary school and then one big test at the end of middle school and then one big test at the end of high school like it used to be. Now, standardized testing has become a major industry, $1 billion industry for companies like Pearson. And they have created all these exams, and the kids now in the US have their entire curriculum is designed to make them pass these tests that are coming one after the other every month. And instead of teachers being able to teach to their passions, to what they know about, to what the students want to learn about, teachers are increasingly forced to teach to what's on the test that some corporation has decided is important. And then the truly difficult part, the really horrific part of this standardized testing is when they attach high stakes to the exams. So you can't get in the advanced classes without taking these tests, or you can't be promoted to the next grade. And the worst is the graduation requirement tests that even if you get a 4.0 in your high school career, you can't graduate without having passed what they call the exit exam. And a recent study out of Boston University shows that the requirements of the exit exam actually increased incarceration rates of people being put in jail by some 12%, because we know when the students don't pass those exams and don't graduate, they end up not being able to get a job, and then they end up having to do survival crimes and getting swept up in the prison pipeline. So that's a bleak picture. How many tests do you all take?
Yeah, actually, it's a strange story. We had a system where you took a test at the end of your primary or elementary school, and that's what you scored decided whether you would get a high school or not. So you'd go to the high school for 4 years, then take another test, and then now that test would decide if you go to university. We've just scraped that system, and we are going to something that sounds more like what you've just talked about.
Oh, no.
Told that the kids will be doing tests from grade 3, which is about, I think, 8-9 years. And they'll do every year they'll do a test, but the exams council tells us, no, it's not a test. We just want to see the results. And I don't know. What do they say the tests are for? Because here they tell us that the tests are for assessing whether the child has learned.
Yes, right. Yes,
Yeah.
right. That's their narrative, is that they want to know that the child has learned what they're supposed to learn, and that there are accountability measures to make sure that teachers and schools are supporting all students. And they talk about these tests as if they're part of a civil rights movement for freedom for kids of color, because we're going to hold the schools accountable to making sure all kids are learning. But the problem with that narrative is that the tests are actually one of the most detrimental aspects of their education. They're denying kids a rich education that promotes critical thinking, right? And they're increasingly, these tests are crowding out all the things we love about education. The arts and music are being cut in the American public school systems, as only the subjects that are tested now are important, right? So if a lot of times schools are threatened with being closed. We will shut down your school if the test scores don't increase. And so then those schools abandon, music, art, and all these other things that make education rich, so that they can just drill the students over and over again to prepare them for the exams. And then the students learn how to eliminate wrong answer choices on multiple choice tests, but they don't learn how to think critically, how to create an argument and back it up with evidence, and how to solve problems in our society. All the things that matter most in education are crowded out by these tests. And I would also just suggest that the absurdity of calling these tests part of a civil rights struggle is revealed when you look at the history of how standardized testing entered the public schools in the first place. Because we know that it was eugenicists that designed these tests, open white supremacists, right? These were people that wanted to prove white male superiority, and then they designed tests. So there's a man, I don't know if you've heard of a guy named Carl Brigham. He was a Princeton professor back in the early 1900s, and he designed the SAT exam, which is our main college entrance exam in the US. And he wrote a book called A Study in American Intelligence. And this book lamented the fact that America was falling behind Europe in terms of its intelligence, because we had too many Africans, we had too many Black people in America, right? So this is the man who invented how we do multiple choice standardized testing. And he used the tests as a gatekeeper to keep out Black people and women from the universities. And we use his same model of standardized tests that have the culturally biased questions that are mostly scenarios and situations that are familiar to white middle class people. And now that's trying to be sold as a tool for equity, and it's really despicable.
Here they told us that the new system is encouraging talent. So basically, by doing all these tests, it means that the system is interested in our children nurturing their talent. So the tests are supposedly part of that. It's so twisted, the kinds of things they say, and I don't know what experience is there, but here people actually believe. They actually believe that. It's so it's so difficult to tell them that's not true. A testing regime cannot improve your talent. In fact, it will shrink it.
That's it.
Yeah.
And I think one of the fundamental misunderstandings about standardized testing and the way it measures what we learn is that learning is fundamentally a collaborative process, right? Learning is about an interaction between multiple people. And it's amazing to watch children interact with each other and collaborate and problem solve and come up with the answers together, right? And then when they can't figure out something, you know, to see what they can do together, asking each other for help. And when that doesn't work, then you can help them introduce new ideas and concepts that can help them figure out the answer. And all of that wonderful, joyous process of collaborating to figure something out is erased when we sit kids down individually and say, tell me what you remember, what you've managed to memorize for this test, right? So testing is an individual process, but learning is a collaborative process, right? So we need forms of assessment that can actually look at what kids can do together, because that's how they learn. And once we get done with school, there's never another time when you're asked to sit down in isolation and just rattle off facts that you've memorized. It's not applicable to our world, right? And so I want to talk about collaborative assessments and performance-based assessments, because I do want to know what my kids have learned.
Yeah.
Right. But it's just that, you know, I think a model like when you get your PhD.
Yeah.
I don't know how it works in Kenya, but the format in the American college system is when you get your PhD, you work with a mentor and you devise a thesis, right? And then you do research over time. And if the research doesn't match your thesis, you revise your thesis, and then you create a work and you present that and defend it to a panel of experts, right? And in that form of assessment, you're getting feedback from people in your field. You can respond to it. And it's a performance-based assessment that can actually promote critical thinking. The problem about that kind of assessment is it's not easily monetized, right? So, the testing companies can't just sell you a product that way. But it actually tells us, what is the student thinking? How did they arrive at those answers?
And you mentioned something about accountability. You know, could you just explain how it feels like from your side when the link that these exam companies draw between the tests and teacher accountability?
Yes. So that's the narrative they use to sell their exams, that we're going to hold teachers accountable to teaching all students and making sure everybody learns. There's a few problems with that narrative. The first is there's never any accountability for the politicians to actually deliver the resources our students need to be successful, right? So I had that hole in the ceiling of my classroom for all 3 years I taught in Washington, D.C. I had to push an industrial-sized garbage can under the hole, and it would fill up with rain every time it rained. And that was my conditions of teaching for 3 years. So where's the accountability for the politicians to give the resources our schools need? You know, we don't have a full-time nurse in every school. Here in Seattle, we have Amazon and Microsoft and Boeing and Starbucks. We have the 2 richest people the world has ever known, except for maybe Mansa Musa. But we have Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos here, but we don't have enough money for a nurse in the middle of a pandemic in every school, right? So we want accountability, but accountability has to start with the resources flowing into our schools and supporting our kids. And the next thing I would say is that it's really backwards the way they've designed this accountability system, because their idea of testing kids 112 times throughout their K-12 career isn't about accountability. It's about selling more and more tests, because I would liken it to people who, like, you know, if you rescued a child who fell off a boat in the Arctic Circle from the water and you pulled them into the boat, right? Would you want to give them, take their temperature and then take their temperature again and again and again and 112 times? Or would you want to wrap them in a blanket and get them warm and dry, right? And I think what we need to understand is that taking that child's temperature over and over again isn't helping them recover and heal and do better, right? And so in the same way, assessing the students over and over and over again isn't actually helping them. What they need is smaller class sizes so we can give them individual instruction. They need up-to-date materials and culturally relevant materials so they can learn about their histories. Too often Black history is completely erased in the classrooms, and they tell all kinds of lies about our history in these corporate textbooks, right? These kids, counselors and supports, not more testing.
And I want us to go to who is interested in this test, but just to clarify for Kenyans, here the exams are administered by the government, although when they started during the colonial times, it was administered by a company, which was, I think it's a Cambridge Examinations something. But at independence, they privatized, but now people are starting to smell a rat and suspecting that these numerous assessments that have been introduced might actually be corporatized. So maybe just explain, how do companies get to test children in the schools? How does that happen?
Yeah, there's a few major corporations. Like Pearson is the biggest one in the US, and I think globally as well. I think they're something like a $9 billion a year corporation, and they, bid for contracts, and then these states, cities, and the federal government buy these contracts from them. And one of the things they believe is that their tests are proprietary information and they keep them shrouded in secrecy. So you can never see the tests, right? They don't want to let educators and parents see these exams, and they say they have to keep them secret. But when we walk by and we see what the kids are doing on these tests, we know that it's very, very culturally inappropriate. And oftentimes it's the things that we're teaching in our classes that we care most about aren't on the exams. And it really robs teachers of their agency, right? So the things that we want to teach aren't necessarily on the test. So, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. They bid for contracts, and then they lobby the politicians to try to increase the number of tests. And that's what happened just now on Monday. I don't know if you heard, but the Biden administration just announced that they would go ahead with this regime of spring testing. And every spring, the states are required to do a round of high stakes testing. And last year it was canceled because of the pandemic. And even the worst Secretary of Education I can imagine, Betsy DeVos, just a completely clueless individual, has no idea what public school students are going through as a billionaire. Even she managed to cancel the standardized tests because of this pandemic. It's really shameful that Biden is moving forward with testing these students, caving to the pressure of the testing companies, and implementing these standardized tests in the middle of a pandemic. What are we going to find out? That our students are struggling? We already know that, right? What we need to do is get them the resources they need to survive. And Biden even promised on the campaign trail, he made a promise actually to my co-editor of Black Lives Matter at School, Denisha Jones. She
Yeah, I
wrote,
saw that.
see
I
that
saw a
video?
video. Yeah. Just yesterday. Yeah.
Amazing, right? So that was at a presidential town hall forum in 2019 when he was running for president. She got to ask him a question and she stood up from the audience and said, "Will you end standardized testing?" And his clear answer, yes. He said, "You're preaching to the choir." Right?
Actually, I guess because I was watching it yesterday, I when she finished asking, I was skeptical that you'd say yes. Oh,
I
but he
know.
has returned the tests.
Yes, and just Monday he broke his promise and is implementing these high stakes tests.
So this is public money paying for the tests. Why not just put it into the schools?
Yes, that is the question that we have to address, right? If we spent those billions of dollars on endlessly assessing our students, on actually supporting them, we would have much better outcomes, much more joyful classrooms, and I think better futures for our kids.
Maybe actually you could just help articulate why public education is important, because here the schools are being privatized and most of the people who have already gone to school, they feel I can afford this for my child, at least for now. So what is the value of having a public education system?
Yeah, I mean, the public schools are one of the last public institutions that's open and free for everybody in the US. So much of our society has been privatized. And, you know, as this neoliberal economic paradigm has taken hold of our economy, it has really excluded so many people from opportunities in many areas. And now it's happening to the public schools as well, with charter schools and voucher schools. And what the charter schools and voucher schools do are siphon money out of the public schools and give them to private charter companies that can do whatever they want and use the money however they want and aren't accountable to voters at all. And those schools actually are more segregated in the US. The charter schools, the privatized schools are more segregated. They have had a track record of having some incredibly harsh discipline policies, and they're not having better outcomes for students. And sometimes they just there's been incredible examples of charter schools scamming money from the public and then taking that money and then just closing schools, and it's really a mess. So we need a system that's free and open to all students, where students can learn to thrive and unlock their potential. So I'm a strong believer in the need for a robust public school system. At the same time, I also recognize that, you know, the public schools have long been manipulated by those in power, right? By billionaires, most who are promoting a white supremacist agenda, actually. And that's been really harmful as well, because when you look at the textbooks in America, like there's an example from a Texas textbook. Well, actually, it's a company that has them all over the country, and it's the McGraw-Hill World Geography textbook. Have you seen that?
No, I haven't.
There was a scandal around this because they had a map of Africa and the United States, and it was talking about the transatlantic slave trade. And the caption said, millions of workers were brought from Africa in the transatlantic slave trade. And it did not talk about the enslavement. It said, it used the word workers, suggesting that they were getting paid. And nowhere in the textbook.
And that they chose to come.
Yes. And they put the section on the transatlantic slave trade in the section of the book called Patterns of Immigration, right? Suggesting that Black people wanted to come check out the US rather that we were kidnapped and a genocide perpetrated against our people. So this is, and then there was a textbook in Connecticut that talked about how slaves were treated like members of the family, how enslaved African people were treated like members of the family, So this is the kind of education that we have to transform and make it about empowering kids to learn the truth about their history, and not just about their enslavement, but also their resistance and their resilience and their great contributions. And none of that stuff is on the tests, right? Helping kids learn the true history and to empower them to think about what are the problems in our world and how can we collectively resist and build a better future. None of those kinds of questions ever exist on the exam.
Yeah, even here, it's so strange. We don't teach our history. So the people leave the education system not knowing their own history. I guess because the exams, again, because of drilling on the exams, people never feel that they have to learn anything about themselves outside of what will come in the exam. And now the exams are more. Maybe you could talk about what are some of the psychological and social problems you've noticed or that have been documented that are related to these tests?
Well, I think that one of the problems is that these tests train kids to believe that knowledge is the ability to eliminate wrong answer choices at faster rates than others. A skill that is useless in the rest of life. And so when students graduate from high school, they're really unequipped to think about collective problem solving and critical thinking. And oftentimes college professors lament that they weren't better taught in high school, but a lot of that is because of the way the testing regime, I call it the testocracy, has manipulated public education. So we want kids to be able to problem solve. And I see that discrepancy in my own classroom. So a lot of our schools are segregated. So at the high school that I teach at, the advanced classes have mostly white students, and then the regular classes have mostly Black and brown students. And I started teaching an ethnic studies class that was an integrated class. So we finally had white kids together with Black kids in the same classroom. And I told those students, you will never take a multiple choice test in this class, right? And because when you circle in A, let's say A was the right answer. I don't know if you knew that answer or if you just guessed it and happened to be right. The other thing I don't know is maybe, let's say you circled A and A was the wrong answer. Maybe you had a really interesting thought process where you were trying to choose between A and B, and you knew it could either be A or B, and there was something about A that was interesting and you thought you should try that. I don't see any of that, right? I don't get to see your thought process. I just see the final score. So these tests really hide more than they reveal about your thought process. So I don't use the tests, and that produces sometimes that can produce anxiety for my white students who are really good at taking the tests, right? And instead, I tell the students, the way I'm going to assess you is your abilities to identify problems in our community, in our city, and in our world, and find collective solutions to those problems. And when I change the metric to that, it turns out our Black students excel, right? Because now they know all kinds of things about how institutional racism functions in our society. And they're in advance of our white students, but you know, the narrative we have in the US is that Black students are on the losing end of the achievement gap. They can never catch up to the advanced thinking of white students. But when we change how we measure knowledge, right? When we look at their ability to work together in groups to find solutions to things like police brutality, mass incarceration, health disparities. These are things that our Black students know a lot about, and turned out they educated our whole class, right? Now, all of a sudden, my white students were excited to learn from their Black peers and saw how in advance they were, right? And it was a beautiful collaboration that emerged in my ethnic studies course. And that's the kind of education I want to see us develop.
Now you're known for linking these problems with the schooling system to Black Lives Matter. And you've said that a good education is a Black Lives Matter education. Sorry, I've misquoted you. But could you just explain why that's important? Because for Africa, we talk a lot about decolonization of knowledge. So would like to hear from the other side of the Atlantic what that means.
Well, we have a lot to learn from you and all the work that you all are doing there to think about how to decolonize education, because we need to do the same thing, you know, to recenter the contributions of Native Americans, indigenous people here. We need to recenter the contributions of Black people that are erased. And so, you know, that's one of our biggest challenges today is building a school system that can make Black Lives Matter. And we launched a movement back in 2016 called Black Lives Matter at School. And it's been one of the most joyful parts of my career is helping to build that movement. It started at an elementary school here in Seattle, in John Muir Elementary School. And it was the summer after 2 Black men were killed by police that were caught on video. It was Alton Sterling and Philando Castile were killed by police. And so that was really traumatic for our youth. And so these educators at John Muir wanted to start the school year off in September, letting their Black students know that they were loved and supported and that this would be a nurturing place for them. And so they came up with an idea of having a little rally in front of the school to celebrate Blackness. And so they had a group called Black Men United to Change the Narrative. And they partnered with the parents, and the art teacher designed a shirt that said, "Black Lives Matter, we stand together, John Muir Elementary." And all the teachers were going to wear those shirts, and the Black families were going to high five all the kids on the way into school that morning. Well, unfortunately, a bunch of white supremacists found out about this event, and they began sending hate mail to the school. And then a really hateful person made a bomb threat against John Muir Elementary School for the audacity of the teachers to publicly celebrate their Black students' lives. And so the school district shut that event down, canceled the event, and had to bring in bomb sniffing dogs that morning to find out if the threat was credible. So I got in touch with those teachers through my friend, Professor Wayne Now. His son went to that school, and he's one of the foremost researchers on high stakes standardized testing. Everybody should read his book called Unequal by Design. But he put me in touch with those teachers, and we came up with a plan to call October 19th Black Lives Matter at School Day. And we organized some 3,000 educators to come to school wearing the shirts that said Black Lives Matter at school. And it was so exciting. And then the teachers in Philadelphia saw what we had done, and they turned it into a week-long action. They took it to the next level. Yeah.
Yeah.
And now we have a national week, Black Lives Matter at School week, every year, the first week of February. It would be amazing if educators in Kenya took up the action next year. Maybe we should talk and prepare for next February.
Yeah, that would be good.
We could turn it into an international action.
Yeah. Oh,
That would be
wow.
fun.
That's such a good idea. And we can also learn how to articulate what the issues are, because it's actually the same problem we have here, but with a different historical background. So I wanted to add, okay, I think you've already covered the origins of the test. You said that it's a eugenicist. These are the people who maybe just explain what a eugenicist is.
Yes. Yeah. The eugenics movement was a white supremacist movement in the early 1900s that tried to find a scientific base for racism. They wanted to justify why the wealth and resources were being hoarded by the richest 1% of white people in the United States by explaining their racism as scientifically based in the fact that they, were trying to prove that Black people were less intelligent, but not just Black people. They wanted to also show that women were less intelligent. They wanted to show that even, swarthy Eastern Europeans were less intelligent than, the rest of Europe and America. And it also had a really horrific side of it that was about sterilizing Black women and women of color, and trying to eradicate bad genes in the population. So there was a horrific ableist side to it that was about oppressing people with disabilities and trying to eradicate their genes from the population. And all of their pseudoscience, of course, has been debunked over and over again. There is no scientific basis for race. We all know that all of humanity began in Africa, and there's only one human race. But they had a political and economic stake in trying to prove the differences of the races. And a big part of that project was developing IQ tests and other forms of standardized testing that could help them prove that white people were smarter. And they began bringing those into the public schools in the early 1900s. And, today they talk about these tests as being tools of equity, but, the Black civil rights leaders at the time knew that these tests were about racism. So W.E.B. Du Bois, one of the most important Black activists, thinkers, public intellectuals in American history, if I could just read to you what he said about these examples.
Yeah.
He wrote here, it was not until I was long out of school, and indeed after the First World War, that there came the hurried use of the new technique of psychological tests, which were quickly adjusted so as to put Black folks absolutely beyond the possibility of civilization. So they would just adjust these tests to make sure they proved white supremacy. And that's the legacy of what we're still trying to deal with today.
Yeah, even here, the tests we got during the colonial era were more difficult for Africans because we had a white settler community and we also had Asian immigrants. So the Africans had the worst tests and the most tests. So I think there's an element of that idea that tests are for weeding out people from the system. And, Africans don't need education. So, use the tests to get them out of the system. That logic is still there. Strange enough, yeah. Wow. But there is a light at the end of the tunnel, which is that you guys boycotted the tests. Tell us how that went. That was so amazing.
It really was. I mean, it puts a smile on my face just to think about the resistance we built at my high school, Garfield High School in Seattle. I'm so proud of my school. Well, I mean, I went to Garfield as a student too. So I've always been proud of my high school. It's the high school that Jimi Hendrix attended. And Quincy Jones, the great music producer.
Yeah.
Who produced for Michael Jackson and many others. And
you guys have a music program?
Yeah, we have an incredible world famous music program. Our jazz band wins a lot of the music competitions in the US and performs around the world. So we have a rich music tradition. We also have a tradition of civil rights activism, human rights activism. You know, the founder of the Seattle chapter of the Black Panther Party graduated from Garfield High School. And
that was who?
Aaron Dixon.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And Martin Luther King made one trip to Seattle in his life. And in that trip, he gave his speech at our high school, right? So we're very proud of our creative thinking and our activism. And I really think we carried on that tradition back in 2013 when there was a teacher named Mallory Clark, and she was an esteemed reading teacher at our school. She would take the students who were the farthest behind in reading and often get them up to grade level within a single year. It was incredible how her program worked. And she called me one day and said she needed to talk to me. And I assumed there was some union issue because I was the union representative, and I met with her after school. And she said to me, Jesse, I'm not going to administer the MAP test this year. It's called the Measures of Academic Progress, the MAP test. It's administered 2 or 3 times a year. Students get it all throughout their education from, starting in elementary school through middle and high school. And she said, this test is useless to me. She said, I take the kids off to the computer lab in the library and they take this test and they get a score back, and that score humiliates them and makes them feel bad about their skills, and it makes it harder for me to build their confidence. And she said to me, guess what I do if I want to know what level my kids are reading at? I have them read a book. Right? Imagine that, right? It's like, yes. And when they read to her out loud, then she can actually hear the specific challenges they're having, not get a score that doesn't tell you much about what their specific reading challenges are. So she says, I'm not going to do something that is harming our kids, demoralizing them, and not helping me at all. And she asked if I would help, and my eyes lit up because I had been organizing against this test for a while. I helped to pass a resolution in our union saying this test was inappropriate and shouldn't be used to judge students and teachers. And so we went department by department and we asked all the teachers, are you getting any useful information from this exam that's helping your instruction? And not a single department said that it was useful. And so we called a meeting and we asked educators if they would join a boycott to refuse to give this test. And everybody was against the test, but people wanted to know what could happen if we refused to give it. And I told them I couldn't sugarcoat it. I had to let them know that we have a progressive discipline policy, but ultimately you could be fired for this action. And then another teacher, Miss Gunn, a math teacher, stood up and she said, I would rather be fired for standing up for my beliefs than seeing another year of this test humiliating my students. and it's testing them on things that I'm not even teaching them about. And so I'm ready. And so I said, okay, let's have the vote. And it was unanimous.
Mm.
And then we called a press conference and we invited the media to come hear why we were doing this.
This is the school teachers this time, or were you doing it as a union?
No, this was just the teachers at my building. At this time,
wow.
the union still wasn't aware of what we were doing.
Yeah.
We went forward with the action. And we explained how harmful these tests are, especially this MAP test wasn't aligned to the curriculum properly. So it wasn't even testing them on the things that we were supposed to be teaching. It was especially harmful for English language learners because the test doesn't measure if what you know in these different subjects, it measures more your English abilities, right? And so we were spelled out all the problems, and then the superintendent did threaten us, the tested subject teachers, especially in math and reading, with a 10-day suspension without pay.
Just pause there a little. The superintendent is the person in charge of the schools of the district.
That's right. So, yes, so the superintendent is hired by the school board in the city and is in charge of running the public school system.
Okay, all right.
And so the superintendent at that time issued a statement that was sent to every school saying, if you refuse to administer this test, you can be subject to a 10-day suspension without pay.
So was this to all the schools? The letter was sent to all the schools, not just Garfield?
It was because the boycott spread to 7 other schools.
So the other teachers had it and then they said, we're also gonna boycott the tests.
That's right. Yeah, a lot of teachers were fed up with these tests. So it spread, and the school district got worried about this revolt, and they threatened us. And actually, right when we got that threat, our testing coordinator, an incredible woman, Miss McBride, got on the intercom and told everybody that a school in Florida had sent us pizza for lunch in solidarity with our boycott. And that just sort of lifted everybody's spirits and let us know that we weren't alone. And we started getting inundated with letters of support. The school district got bombarded with phone calls telling them to drop the attack. People held rallies in cities all over the United States in support of us. And
so just sorry, the parents and the children were behind this boycott.
Yes, we got the PTA, the Parent Teacher Association, which is the parent group at Garfield, voted to support us. The Black Student Union and the student body government voted to support us. We had the NAACP, one of the oldest civil rights groups in the country, voted to support us. And we held a rally on the steps of Garfield and invited the media. And we talked about the alternatives to standardized tests, how we want authentic assessments like performance-based assessments. And we showed examples like the consortium schools in New York that have a waiver and they don't give standardized tests, and they actually have better outcomes for their students. And we did our research and we built a campaign, and it was incredible because by the end of the school year, near the end of the year, we got another email from the superintendent, and he announced that in fact, they would end the MAP test altogether for Seattle's high schools. And so not only did no teacher get reprimanded, but we actually scored a huge victory in the struggle for authentic assessment. And that struggle kicked off a national movement. It was amazing to see how people were inspired by that, and the opt-out movement grew. And tens of thousands of parents around the country started opting their kids out of the tests and telling the school district, my kid will not take that exam. And that movement is poised to grow again, I think, this spring with Biden trying to mandate these tests. I think we're going to see another big wave of parent opt-out. So I'm excited for the future of test resistance.
And was there backlash from the media and the politicians? What did they say?
Yeah, there was some media and politicians. You know, the local newspaper, the Seattle Times, ran articles against us. But it has become so absurd, the amount of standardized testing. When kids are taking 112 standardized tests, it really angered so many families that these tests have taken over our education system that we received an overwhelming amount of support. And in the end, we were able to win a lot of support, and a lot of politicians started changing from supporting the test and not wanting to get on the wrong side of this. Yeah.
Oh, wow. I wish we would be able to do that. In Kenya, a lot of people believe that tests are necessary for quality. Yeah, so it's difficult to convince people. And yet we are already seeing a lot of psychological problems with the kids due to tests. Yeah.
Oh, the anxiety, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
So, what I mean, children are having psychological problems. We have school riots, and they're all linked to the exams, but we are still insisting on having the exams because of quality, merit. We still believe in merit.
They've been disguising privilege and power as merit for a long time. And yeah, the impact on the youth is so tragic to see the kids get so just twisted up in knots and so anxious about these exams. There were so many stories that parents were telling about kids throwing up before the tests, kids pulling their hair out, biting their fingernails down until they bleed, because they just believe their whole future rests on the outcomes of these tests, and their school could get shut down if they don't do well on the tests, or they won't graduate. And putting that kind of stress on kids is really
could you could you say something about the distrust in teachers? Because I mean, aren't all these things part of disempowering teachers?
That's right. I mean, I think a big part of the move to high stakes testing is this deprofessionalization, saying that teachers don't know enough. We can't trust them to educate. And it's also about undermining the teachers unions. You know, because of this neoliberal era that we're in, one of the big pushes has been destroying unions, especially trying to undermine public sector unions. And so if they can make your job dependent on the outcome of a test, so that you no longer have job security afforded to you by the union, and you can be fired if your students don't do well on these exams, right, then they can get rid of the power of the union. And so that was really what they had in mind, right, was using these tests to undermine the power of the union and to eventually erode the union into nothing. And because parents, students, and teachers rose up around the country refusing to take these exams by the tens of thousands, leading walkouts in some school buildings and rallies, we've actually been able to push back on these. And you know, it's the testing companies still have their power, and they're still pushing for these exams, but it's not a one-sided narrative anymore, right? There's more and more people that that know these exams are harmful and that are supporting the union's movement against them.
Mm-hmm. Even here, in fact, one civil servant was had to say that they didn't see why we needed teachers' unions when the US and the UK don't have them.
Oh, what? I'm glad to be in the union. I'm proud to say that isn't true.
Yeah, and in fact, that's why I really wanted to talk with a teacher so that we can sort of set that record straight. So, to wind down, maybe we could talk about what's, okay, you've already mentioned it, but I wanted to hear something else about the alternative to testing. So you are talking about having children do a guided assessment.
Yes.
Just tell us how it works and make it visible for Kenyan listeners.
Yeah, I want to describe what they do at the New York Consortium schools for performance assessment. And this is a network of some 30 schools in New York City. And these are public schools. They're not charter schools or privatized schools. They're the same as the public schools in New York, except for they have a waiver and they don't have to give the high stakes standardized tests. They snuck in a provision in the 90s, I believe, and they were able to opt their school network out of the tests. And they have an inquiry-based approach to education rather than a rote memorization approach. And that is a really powerful example of how you can rethink assessment, because they do performance-based assessments and they do it in every subject. So it could be math, science, history. The students develop a thesis throughout their time in the course, and then they work with peers and they work with a mentor and their teacher to research the topic. If the research doesn't match their thesis, they have to revise it. And so you can imagine, like in a language arts course, they are making an argument. Maybe it's about the role of African American literature in the US. And then they might draw on different authors like James Baldwin, okay, or Toni Morrison, and show how these authors have shaped American literature, right? And then they present their thesis to a panel of experts. So they actually bring in authors from New York City to listen to the students present their thesis. And then instead of the exam being time away from learning, time when they're taken away from their class and assessed individually, this is time when they actually get feedback on their work from experts in the field, and they can deepen their thinking through the assessment, right? And this network of schools has incredible outcomes, because if the proponents of high stakes standardized testing are right, and we need these tests for accountability, then the New York Consortium schools would have the worst outcomes, especially for students of color. Yeah. But the problem is these schools without the standardized tests have the very best outcomes. They have the highest graduation rates for their English language learners, for their Black students, and their students attend college at much higher rates than the rest of the New York public schools. And more importantly, they're able to think critically and solve problems. And so it's a really amazing example that I think should spread throughout the country and around the world.
Yeah, but that would mean more empowered teachers. And I think that's the point, is not to have teachers do the actual work, to have them always being controlled from outside.
That's right. That's right.
Wow.
Yes.
Gosh, you guys are going through roughly the same thing that we are going through here. It's amazing.
We got to support each other. So I appreciate you having me on here. any ways we can collaborate. It would be great to get together soon and talk about building Black Lives Matter at school and resistance to the tests. So let's stay in touch.
So maybe we could finish off with, tell us your dream for public education.
Oh, I would love to. I would like to radically reimagine the way schooling works. I think that to begin, we need wraparound services so that schools become centers that support communities. We should have full healthcare programs and dental care and eye care and trauma counseling. And we can have meals served to the communities as well. And they can just be hubs of supporting our communities. But more than that, I want to rethink the way instruction is done. And I would like to end the segregation of the subjects, right? Even so that instead of going to math class and science class and reading class and history class, we could have problem-based learning where the courses were built around real issues that the students cared a lot about and were worried, something that they were worried about. So imagine a course in the US called Should We Defund the Police? And in that class, you could learn about the mathematics of the police budgets. You could analyze the city budgets and how they spend way more on police than they do on healthcare and education. And you could learn about percentages, and you could create new city budgets, right? In that class, you could learn the history, right, of where police came from. They actually emerged from slave patrols that were used to enforce enslavement, right? And also from private security companies in the North that were breaking picket lines and stopping unions, right? You could write speeches and policy proposals in your language arts segment. So you could learn all the subjects, but do it in a way that's about solving real problems in our community. And I think that way students would be energized and engaged in their schooling in a way far beyond what we can imagine in our current school system. And I'm excited to be in the struggle for that kind of a world.
Thank you so much for sharing your experience and your dreams, for teaching us also.
Oh,
yeah, it's not only the children in Garfield High, it's also us. So thank you so much. I hope this is not the last time we'll talk. I'll be especially asking you a lot of questions because we're also having the struggle with the assessments, and we haven't quite figured how to push back on them.
Well, solidarity with your struggle.
Thank you. And we are in solidarity with yours. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us.
It's been wonderful. I appreciate you. Have a great day.